Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, there is a funny little, I don't know, maybe funny is not the right word, but there was something that popped up on my social media that just reminded me, for those that don't know, little Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, I always make sure, Nick, that, I send you over the script. I give you the prep, the questions, the things we're going to talk about. And I don't know if you saw the video of the president of the IOC having a little post-Olympics wrap-up, and someone might be losing their job in a very public fashion.
Yeah, she was very quick to throw them under the bus. If you haven't seen the clip, I'd be surprised if you hadn't. If you work in sports, you probably have seen it. But if you haven't, she pointed out multiple times to her team not giving her what she needed, which is just I've never seen that sort of reply before. Not at least I need to warn it. We'll look into it further. It needs investigation first before I can comment. No, my team's not giving me what I need. And so it's created a very divided reaction across the industry. Like, is Kirsty Coventry at fault here? Is it her comms team that has briefed her at fault? What's the lay of the land here? Look, I think my take on all of that is that the IOC, I don't know the exact specifics, but they have a briefing during the Olympics pretty much every day of different things that are going on, and it is an open forum for questions to be asked. So the expectation to have everything nailed going into that, I think, is probably a tough ask for her team to have every single thing covered, is particularly if the president's running around all over the place. I just think that she needed a better response, basically, rather than just throwing it straight at my team's not briefed me and staring them down at the side of the stage, which is pretty unprecedented. But it has got a reaction from the rest of the industry, like a mix between everything I've seen from she's not up for it, which is a bit of a reaction I think she's made some great steps forward since she's taken over the responsibility. It's very quick reaction, through to throwing the comms people under the bus. And I just think it's probably somewhere in the middle. Although if we start to see some news and headlines that the communications chief's been moved on, then we'll know what the reaction was. Yeah, exactly. That would be the icing on the cake.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we run events, right? And we're not in the business of making people look silly, because it's not good for our audience. It's not good for us. It's not good for them. So we always try to prep, but there's always the Q&A, right? And there's only so much you can do. And we've used Slido as a way to maybe sort of circumvent some of that, but it always happens. There's always a question you didn't prep for. And I think, to your point, that question may feel inappropriate. It may feel unprepared. It's just, we'll look into it. I think, to your point, I don't think I want to judge my entire CEO based off of their ability to handle a press conference. There are bigger things and a bottom line to be looking at over that. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things. We talked about it before the Olympics. There's always these funny stories that come up. I mentioned the Swedish guy eating pastries at the Summer Olympics, and then the Canadians and the curling. Like, there's always these little funny, interesting stories. And I guess that's just one more to kind of close things off with.
Yeah, I think it's almost a little bit meme-worthy, which is a bit sad. I mean, the only thing I would say that the comms person definitely should have done is given her a better response if she gets something she's not ready for, rather than make sure she's briefed on every single thing happening in the world at some time. So we'll have to see what happens for that. Hopefully, I don't know. Well, hopefully nothing happens, but if something happens, also fun to talk about. So I'll keep an eye on things, but I don't expect much to change from here to the next Olympics.
Like I said, we'll keep an eye on the LinkedIn job pages. But Nick, moving into serious business, today what we're going to kick off with is we're going to talk about Apple and look at it from two different, broadcast partners that they have. And the first one we're going to start off with is the MLS. The MLS has just started off their newest season, to my understanding, if I've done my knowledge, or to my knowledge is correct, and I've done my research, which I provide my own notes, so I've got no one to blame but myself if I'm wrong. They're kicking off their 31st season. What I guess is a bit interesting is at the end of last year, it basically got announced that their partnership with Apple was going to be cut short after the 2029 season. Now, just for a little bit of history, this deal was signed in 2022. It was a 10-year deal worth $2.5 billion, which we talked about quite a bit, and we're going to go back and talk about that some more. But essentially, we are now kind of 4 years into that deal, and Apple has already essentially sort of pulled the plug. I think the other thing worth understanding about that deal is initially it was exclusively on Apple. Now, they did have some sub-licensing, but you had to get an Apple TV subscription, and then you had to pay for an additional MLS season pass on top of that. So essentially, you needed 2 subscriptions to be able to access the MLS content. Now, they're, despite ending that partnership early, they are still going to continue working together until the end of the 2029 season. You will still be able to access content on Apple, but to my understanding, it will no longer require an additional MLS season pass. Essentially, if you are a standard Apple TV subscriber, you will have access to the MLS. And we've also seen some things where they've done some stuff with OneFootball and other people, essentially trying to get more people onto the platform. So, Nick, as we initially started about this, maybe let's just go back a little bit and talk about, at the time, what were some of the thoughts we had, the pros, the cons, or just sort of the new news of having Apple step into this space, just to remind people before we get to where we're going to work ourselves to.
Yeah, I remember when that deal was announced, and it was quite exciting. At the same time, massive flags and concerns when I saw this announced. That we've done episodes on this, so you can sense check what I'm about to say and cross-reference with what I'm saying now and see how accurate we were back then. I think we always thought that launching a dedicated platform and destination on Apple came with its risks, basically. And we've seen that proven out since then, where no one can build a single point of destination to drive fans to and rely on that alone to really build an audience. And you've seen the moves that Apple and MLS have made have proven that out. Even interestingly, the timing of this announcement of the 2029 break clause was only the month before was the announcement they were going to make it free to access and make it much more available on the Apple TV Plus product. So the road to it is actually an interesting one, just to make reference to. And we had Seth Bacon before on from the MLS who's talked a bit about that deal as well. But the MLS were intentional many years ago to basically line up all their media rights. And what they wanted to do was have the opportunity to sell on to a big tech company, to a big major global deal. And Apple was the one that obviously came to the table with a check and investment, which was higher than anyone else was willing to give. And that got everyone excited because of the X factor Apple has. Many concerns about the ability to deliver it, but you think if anyone can pull a rabbit out of its hat, find a new way of doing things, one of the best tech companies at the time should be able to find that draw card. I was interested to see how they were going to use Apple products to drive audiences to that platform organically, whether it be through notifications, different app services. They launched an Apple Sports product, for example. How were they going to funnel people to this premium product? Here we are today. I would say also one thing that stood out from back in time was Apple hired a guy called Jim DiLorenzo. He came from Amazon. He was in charge of Amazon's sports business when they really got up and running on their sports product. So it was a clear statement of intent. We're going to make a move into sport that Apple made back then. And really, since the MLS deal, I've been left wanting, waiting for a little bit more to come out of this arrangement. And my theory is that Apple loves the idea of control, the global side of things. They also got a lot of brand visibility as part of that agreement. And my speculation here is, particularly from a US lens, is they weren't able to get any deal anywhere close to having that flexibility, dynamism, and control that came with the MLS deal. And maybe the results haven't been what they wanted either. So I'm not surprised at all that we are here. It is not clear whether that means Apple will step away. What it means is they've initiated the exit clause. It could be that they renegotiate a deal. 2029 is a number of years away, right? So they have a lot of time for each other to work themselves out to see if this approach, which is having it more in front of the paywall, leads to bigger audiences. And obviously coupling with what they're doing with Formula One is another layer to all this. But they could still renegotiate a deal well before the 2029 break clause is manifested or exited. And they could continue business as usual, but just in a different vein, a different shape to what they've committed to today.
We will get to Formula One, but a few other things to dig into there. And one of the things Seth mentioned, I think, is worth mentioning. MLS, not only did they make the choice to try to align all of their rights to be able to go all in on one direction, they also were proactive in lining up their tech stack. Where one of the things with working with Apple, if I remember correctly, is that they were going to be in charge of all the production as well, similar to what we've seen.
The MLS will be in charge of production. Yeah,
correct. Yeah. Which is I don't want to say a unique strategy, but it is something that was an intentional choice by them to do that. And then the other side of that as well was there was the Messi effect, which was spoken about quite a bit, that the hope of that superstar draw would help bring in subscriber numbers. And then also it is 2026. The World Cup is being hosted in America. And I think there were other factors taking place, that it wasn't even solely dedicated just to the strength of the league itself, but also the sport of soccer, football itself is going to be growing with the build up to 2026 in the World Cup. We've also got Lionel Messi, where they probably hope there might be some more superstars. There were things that went into this decision to think that they could justify going to a exclusively behind the paywall approach with what they did with Apple.
Yeah, they certainly did. And they've made some steps since then that I think have been all really smart decisions. The first step that I really loved about the relationship was the fact they gave all MLS season ticket holders access to the platform as part of a season ticket. I just love that. I don't think that exists in any other major leagues or major sports properties that I'm aware of, largely because of the rights approach. But that synchronicity between being a season ticket holder and having access year round, I just love the value that provides to a fan and makes the season ticket almost worth just a lot more as a result of that value add that it brought to the table. They have sub-licensed some of the rights. They've created more visibility on Fox and other channels. They've also now put it more in front of the paywall. And I think they really needed moves that had to happen. But now I just wonder where MLS is. They had to make, I guess, a needle-moving change here if what they were seeing, because we haven't got full visibility on their ratings. We've got a couple of numbers that have been shared around, wasn't working. And I can't see how it could at the scale that they were after. Because if you think about soccer in the US, you think about the scale of it at the grassroots level, there's such a lovely funnel of audience opportunity there. And that's why MLS has been a massive draw card for investors, and also probably what Apple saw as well. So I just think that they needed to make a needle-moving change to their approach, which could still lead to this being a successful investment for Apple and for MLS, I guess, in some ways, about the visibility, not just the check that they were receiving. But if they stayed on the course, I think they were pretty much doomed for failure, quite frankly, if they didn't do something significant. So I haven't ever watched the MLS on Apple. I've just because of the nature of, I don't have an iPhone, I don't have an Apple product. I could go and find a username and create one because my kids have got an iPad, but I can't be bothered. And that's the thing. I think the challenge they're always going to have by putting their eggs in the Apple basket is just that ability to really achieve mass reach, mass audience for the games that matter. So sub-licensing, continuing to get more visibility on free-to-air has to be a priority.
So now we're going to shift things a little bit in that other direction towards Formula One. This will be the season that commences, them being the U.S. provider for Formula One exclusively. Some of the people in the office are, we're going to be able to watch this. Like, no, guys, you're still going to have to go through Sky Sports. But I guess the question here, Nick, is maybe twofold question. Should the way this has worked itself out be a red flag for Formula One? Or do you think Formula One as a product is unique enough, or potentially will take strategic approaches from Apple's side as well, having worked with MLS, that they will be able to avoid a similar situation? Because I think what's worth keeping in mind, and I try to explain this to the people in the office, is Formula One is not in America what you think it is over here in the UK. There's still the NFL, there's still the NBA, still Major League Baseball, NHL, all the college sports. And we talked about this with Kean Brittle, our Black Book writer. Even in the States, you still have NASCAR, you still have IndyCar. Like, I'm not saying Formula One isn't popular, but Formula One is still, I don't want to say emerging sport, but it's certainly not a tier one sport in America the way it is in the UK. And just in terms of, I think some people in the office were a little bit taken aback with that. And like I said, Kean Brittle, our Black Book editor, made that comment about it as well. So it's just, do you think, Nick, is this if I was Formula One, would I be concerned? Or are they perhaps being naive that their product is good enough to not have those problems? Or do you think Apple will take a different approach? Just threw it on the wall, Nick. How it sticks, I'll let you go.
Look, there's a few things in there, isn't there? I would say the short answer on the reality check that I think Formula One knows their status. I think they probably see that NASCAR and IndyCar getting huge media rights checks. They're multi-billion-dollar deals that they have in place, whereas Formula One's is a much smaller year-on-year ROI. That there's a big upside if they get it right and they can usurp those other two properties. But they have decades and decades of legacy in those markets and fans that that's not easy to just rip away after building up for so long. I'm sure they could see themselves as a competitor with IndyCar and alike, and see if they could, take back or secure some of those audiences of fans as part of theirs instead. But to date, we've not seen the unequivocal growth in ratings and audience, even after the Drive to Survive, wave that was generated all those years ago. That's still going and going strong for them in terms of audiences and visibility. There's been a disconnect between turning that into live race goers. Now, there's a couple of things. Does it matter? Do they need big ratings when you've got this sort of ecosystem available? Like the events hosts pay a huge premium to host Formula One right across the year. The big races in the US do actually rate really well, but all the others, just because of time zones as well, aren't set up for success. So does their model need to have higher ratings is the question I have. I just, maybe they've taken an approach that with the strength of their social media engagement, with the strength of some of their other properties like the Formula One movie, which was a partnership with Apple, and Drive to Survive and alike, maybe they've got enough touch points that maybe they have taken a more progressive way of approaching their business model than perhaps others will give them credit for. But what I would say is a bit weird. I did see the CEO of F1, Stefano Domenicali, state, and the headline is, "Oh, we're going to have more eyeballs and more visibility now that we're on Apple." And I just can't see what way you can look at that's going to be achieved, because ESPN's reach and visibility is what every property's dream is, basically, particularly for tier 2. So I haven't looked at the specifics of what he was referring to or try to work out an upside or logic to his statement. Maybe there is something that I've missed. Maybe there's more rights or more live events going to be shown on the channels, which they think are going to move the needle. But Apple does not have a big audience or footprint. Go check out all the different sources out there on streaming engagement. Apple doesn't have a big audience out there. So there's a lot of work to be done, and my fear is that they've taken a little bit more money from Apple than they would have elsewhere, and ultimately they're going to come out the other side of it. And I do sense a little bit of deja vu where they're going to come back to a point where, like, well, how do we grow our audience again, get more visibility on free to wear and all those types of things? Will we see more sub-licensing deals come back to the fore again because they need to get more visibility?
Yeah, we'll see, Nick. I think you raised a good point. It's like the MLS where it's domestic, and it's a bit harder to excuse why aren't people turning in at prime time. I could understand when there's a race going on in, Japan, and it's at whatever time in the morning it doesn't tune in. So maybe that plays a factor in it. But I do think I'm a big fan of exposure. I'm a fan of free to air. We're going to talk about free to air in our next story, and I do think it could be a similar case. But maybe to your point, that doesn't matter as much for them.
Well, final thing I'll say is I believe, I didn't look this up, but I'm pretty sure that the F1 TV Pro product, their premium OTT product, is being made available through Apple TV, I believe, for the US audiences. So it's another example of that vertical integration we've seen for a bunch of streamers, where they're able to get access to the free product and then get marketed to buy that premium product. We've seen with the Zone and the NFL, Amazon with the NBA. And I'm just intrigued to see if that works as effectively as they hope it is, because they'll have to migrate audiences and fans from the traditional product into the Apple ecosystem, which might be easy, but we know comes with any technical migration comes with its challenges. And we've talked about that a few times over the years.
Yeah. Well, shifting over to free to air, there was a story that came out with the Rugby Six Nations, which, rugby is not maybe the biggest sport, but I think it's a really great story for us to cover, because of how much we're talking about advertisement and the fact that, we've talked about European football leagues stagnating, TV revenues. Does advertising need to be something that becomes a bigger part of that? And the story that came out for this is, for the first time ever on free-to-air broadcast of the Rugby Six Nations in the UK, they introduced in-game advertisements. So to be very clear about this, I think there were 2 advertisements that took place during the game. So, a very, very small portion of the game itself. And this was the first time that this has been done, whether for rugby, football, and pretty much what the results came back were engagement numbers for brands very good, as they wanted. But unsurprisingly, for people who've never had in-game advertisements, they were incredibly lopsided in terms of being opposed to having commercials involved. And I guess, Nick, the question is, does it matter? Does it matter that the fans were upset by the commercials? At the end of the day, we're talking about 2 spots within the game. If it opens up more revenue, does it really matter? And how much do fans actually care? Like, I know they'll say if I could be without it, I wouldn't want it. But how much do they actually really care?
Well, look, British fans and also many other countries, not just British, like to complain about stuff. And I'm not surprised that they would, if they have a choice of not having it versus having it, what will they answer to it? But the other way to ask that question is, if the choice is it for going to be behind a paywall, pay TV, DAZN or whatever, versus being made freely available, free to wear for everyone to access, which one would you choose if you had to have commercialization ramped up with a couple more ads? Pretty sure I know which answer you would get in reality. So, look, I think when anytime you get change, there's going to be a reaction to it, and change always leads to negativity in almost every aspect you can think of.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised. Obviously, there's some considerations that they'll have to make so they don't disrupt the viewing experience too much. But the reality is, with a sport like rugby, there is a lot of stoppages in play. Perfect for running ads of some description, and running it in game or in play, so it's split screen and the like.
Yeah.
Will have marginal, if any, difference impact to the overall viewing experience of someone's exposure to an 80-minute game or 2-hour TV experience. So I think it's something because it's new. It is nothing in the future, and it's essential for sport to see this succeed because, again, what we've talked about previously is this idea of advertising's role becoming greater and greater in sports to ramp up the value it provides from monetization is going to be critical for sports and live sports success. And also to, I guess, pull away from particularly markets like the UK, from the tentacles of someone like Sky and pay TV, which has historically overpaid, I would say in inverted commas, for the rights because they were able to turn that into more meaningful value. Now this gives them just another mechanism to drive a little bit more revenue, a little bit more value out of those rights. And that can only be a positive for broadcasters and a positive to keeping these live sports events free to watch.
And I think it just needs to happen. And all just from a business perspective as well, in the sense of domestically, and we're going to talk about international rights next after this, but domestically it is stagnating. And that's the simplest, easiest way to instantly add value with, which I will say, like, apologies, maybe it's just because I'm an American, I've been brought up with it and I don't care. It really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter when you think about how long a football match is, a rugby match is. You're not going to really care. No, like, you might moan about it, but to your point, who's going to sit there after the game and be like, oh, that was a great football game, but I really hated that commercial. I don't think anyone's not turning in the next week because of that.
Yeah. No, people will get over it very quickly. I mean, we've had a few other people talk about ads recently, and Red Zone was the big one that got the headlines, and that went by, and now we're just business as usual on that front. And I just think you're just going to see that become part and parcel, but it has to be commitment to it almost. Like, I think now it's just going to become part and parcel of the game. And if it does, then people won't even mention it in the future. And I think the knock-on effects of what FIFA is going to be doing around the World Cup and their hydration break, which is basically a nice way of bringing ads into the game, whichever way they've been able to pull that off. It's just going to become more and more part and parcel of it because it has the net benefit of having more ads incorporated that don't upset the overall viewing experience significantly will be worth the investment.
I agree. I think it's coming. I think people they're going to need to accept that.
What's happening now and next in sports tech? As AI adoption accelerates rapidly, the inaugural Global Sports Tech Report from Sports Pro and Sportradar reveals which technologies and trends are driving real business impact across 6 core areas of sport. Informed by a global survey of senior executives and insights from leading tech and sport organizations, the report offers a 360-degree view of what's working today and where the industry is headed tomorrow. Access the full report via the Sports Pro website.
Speaking about the Premier League and its dominance and its ability to make money, although I did reference just a minute ago that domestic rights have mostly stagnated, and that's just not in the UK. We've obviously spoken about Ligue 1 however many times in the last couple of months, but we've seen the same with Serie A in Italy. We've seen the same with Bundesliga in Germany, the major leagues there. One place that the Premier League isn't slowing down is its international space. And the reason I bring this up, there is a deal that ESPN is now going to be broadcasting the Premier League in Latin America for 450 million £8 extension, which is a 25% increase on their previous broadcast rights deal, which, if numbers are right, I think it brings the Premier League's international broadcast value up to $12.25 billion for the 2025-2028 cycle.
That's a big number.
It is a big number. And again, still to this day, it is the only league that makes more money internationally than it does domestically. And I guess the question to phrase with this, Nick, like, why do we care about the broadcast rights in Latin? That's not to belittle those markets, but, this isn't the biggest deal that we're going to talk about or have talked about. I guess for me is, at a time in Europe when we are seeing stagnation of broadcast rights domestically, what does it say for the other European leagues that they're having those issues domestically, but the Premier League is seemingly the one that is dominating internationally, and there's no other market really to go to? Like, is this really problematic for them?
Well, look, I think that we've also talked about that the top tier sports properties are in general, particularly the Premier League and the NFL, bucking all the trends and continue to drive up values. And the Premier League has been doing international deals and still seeing that growth across a number of markets over the last year or two. And quite frankly, culturally, the Premier League is in a place of its own. Like, every time I travel anywhere in the world, Premier League hits me from somewhere, whether it be from people asking me about it, through just to seeing it covered, talked about in the media, whatever it might be. The Premier League has massive weight in conversation and fandom. And anyone I speak to whenever I've traveled will always have a local team and a Premier League team, basically, at a minimum of their focus. And I think to some extent, maybe La Liga had that, and particularly in markets like LATAM, I think that's where La Liga is pretty strong. So La Liga will not be happy to see Premier League getting such a big uplift. Now, when we do talk about uplifts, we have to put in perspective in real terms because of inflation and so forth. So 25% sounds massive. It's not quite as big when you start putting into compound annual growth, but it's still a surprise number, and it's not a small number, at 450 million, to see talked about, because I've not even seen really that deal talked about in media circles. Yeah, that number makes it instantly something that I'm going to be following moving forward. So the domestic price obviously the per game value has been dropping. Premier League still keeps winning, and I just don't see where that changes. Now, I just think the alarm bells have to be ringing for La Liga and Bundesliga, especially because they sort of sit, I think, above the next tier in terms of their international deals. I won't put Serie A in that mix, or definitely not Liga, because they have some major deals out of the US and with ESPN. With the growth of the Premier League and the fact that La Liga has lost Messi since the last deal was struck, Messi's gone to the US, Ronaldo's gone out. A lot of the major Spanish players have moved out of that market. I don't know. I just feel like they might be getting a little bit nervous of what that renewal deal looks like. And it's a big number right now. It's big, $1 billion deals in the US. I just don't know if they'll be able to keep it up anywhere near that level. But obviously, Bundesliga's major USP in their rights is the fact that they provide a ready to serve production of the Bundesliga. And I think they've still got some Americans playing in the league, which obviously gives them a little bit of X factor there. So I think they'd be very nervous, though, to see what manifests in the next cycle.
Well, we'll avoid talking about the European Super League, Nick, and why that's inevitable, and this being part of that. So we're not going to talk about that, but we will talk about a little bit Germans with the Bundesliga, and two former Bundesliga employees, Christian Seifert and our good friend Andreas Hayden, in the media business that they set up a couple years back with Dyn Media. Please go back, look up some podcasts we've spoken about Dyn before. Essentially, basically trying to own the German market for everything except for football, I think, is kind of their thing. Although maybe we've said that one day, given who Christian Seifert, former CEO of Bundesliga, and then Andres, formerly the CEO of DFL Media. So they've got some ties there. But what's interesting is it's just been announced after the launch of Dyn Media that the company is going to split itself into Dyn Sport and Dyn Media. Dyn Sport being the sort of consumer-facing product, which will continue operating as it has been, and then Dyn Media being the tech and production, and essentially trying to accelerate growth by basically offering their streaming services to other people, is my understanding. So, Nick, I guess part of me is not really surprised, given who the two, headmen of this organization is, that this structure is going to take that sort of approach and splitting out parts of the business. But what's your spin on this, or what's your take on this? Is this the smart thing in terms of Dyn trying to diversify its revenue opportunities, or seeing that B2B actually probably has a larger financial opportunity for them, as opposed to sort of the level of rights that they're at. And that's not to downplay what they're doing. If I've seen the stats correctly, they're doing something like over 4,000 live games a year across all the sports. So it's a small, I think it's just over 3,000. So it's not a small operation of what they're putting on Dime Media, but the technology behind it could potentially be worth more. We think about like BAM Tech back in the day with Major League Baseball selling that off to Disney or something like that.
It's going to be intriguing to see where it goes. I think when I saw, before they launched this new initiative, I saw Andreas present the work they'd done around creating this content desk or content hub, an initiative that they have launched since. And it was super impressive. Basically, when they launched Dine, they did it on a shoestring. They launched it as a startup, right? They had to make not only investments, but ways of really cost saving and using technology to become more efficient in their delivery, to make every subscription worth more to them by selling that as their core business. So that what they ended up doing, because they needed to, and they had a blank piece of paper, was almost reinvent or redevelop the whole way of delivering live sports through this very remote cloud-based approach that many major broadcasters simply can't mirror because of the legacies of how they work. And so Dine have been super successful with this product to create super efficiency on how they operate, and I guess help with the margins of revenue to delivering the live broadcast product. So that's sort of the scene setting as to why they've done it. And it is really cool to see. I think I've talked about it briefly, actually, when I did a review of the Swedish event, the Streaming Tech Sweden event, where it was presented. But basically, turning an outside broadcast trucks, a bunch of trucks, into like one little van was all you would need. And just taking away some of the practical production aspects that would normally cost a lot of money. They'd simplified it and made it more efficient and effective. So it's a really interesting business. Innovation that the industry really needs to improve the value of each and every game that is the Bing live broadcast, and trying to remove some of the costs that are attached with it, but still be able to deliver it and deliver it at a standard that moves the needle and is valuable enough to audiences. Now, how big will this opportunity be? I mean, you use the BAM Tech example. That's probably the most obvious one where I can think of as well, where there's a major rights owner or rights holder that is splitting and setting up shop. I don't know how big that opportunity is. I would hesitate to say it's going to be a bigger opportunity than the Dine Sport proposition, but it could be a more profitable one. Just because if it's run well, it's getting lots of clients on board, there's not a huge cost to it because they're able to innovate and keep developing the product through the Dine Sport business and just keep transferring that into the other business. Then you can see quite quickly that becoming more profitable, at least in the interim, until Dine scales to the level that their investors are hoping it will. And just one thing, you made a point before about the fact that the intention of focusing on non-football fans. Who was involved with the last investment round? Bundesliga. So we're actually involved, and now they are invested into it. So I'm not saying that means anything definitively, but they definitely want some skin in the game, because if they do continue to scale their audience, particularly in the DAC market, what's a logical next step for them is to perhaps start looking at football as a possible investment opportunity. But they don't have to rush ahead. They've got lots of areas to grow and develop the business from here.
The story will continue to follow. We need to get Andreas back, so I'll speak to him like, hey, how do we get you on an upcoming episode? Because I'm sure he can give us more in depth. Maybe we can get some things out of him long term, but we do need to get Andreas back on.
One thing I would say is that my only fear, I think, so it's super exciting to see this stuff. I hope it really works for them. My piece of anecdotal feedback will be, I just hope that they really find a way to balance the management of two very different businesses. Whilst the technologies are obvious, selling services to the sports industry, selling tech services, is way easier said than done, and versus making decisions around how you broadcast live sports. They've got some really smart people, so I'm pretty confident if anyone could work it out. The people I've met there all are pretty good operators, but that is still not. It's going to still be a little challenge here. That doesn't just sell itself, right? You've got to really work at it. So I'd be interested just to see how much momentum and how much they do prioritize that. So not just having it there as like an organic growth vehicle, but really invest into sales and marketing resource and developing more, getting more clients on board, and how big they go with it whilst trying to balance everything else. That's a tricky tricky balancing act for any leadership team to manifest.
Yeah, well, going from one of our friends, Andreas Hayden, to another friend, David Guinan. Because of David Guinan, you and I now are obviously massive fans of rodeo, equestrian, and all those sorts of sports. And it also ties in massive. I love it. I need to get my subscription renewed for the Cowboy Channel. Not done that since David's left, but not only that, are we're big fans now, but also because you are also, for the Sports Pro New York event, going to be interviewing somebody that may have a little bit of relevancy to this, is looking at an investment made by a CVC group, Global Sports Group. They have just are preparing to acquire the Equine Network for around $300 million. Now, I think what's interesting here, Nick, is we've talked about private equity. We've talked about CVC. They've done things with rugby. They've done things with League One. They've done things with Volleyball World, all around the media rights space. Some of them more successful than others. Some of them still to be determined. Some of them, maybe they're not going to maybe necessarily make their money back on, but they're making different investments, Nick. And $300 million is not a small investment. And it is into something that some of us might say is a little bit niche, but I think it also might mean that, David Guinan's favorite expression is niches get riches. And that's not to say there isn't a large equine audience out there. But Nick, it's not a small amount of money they're preparing to look at acquiring. And I guess maybe the question is, Nick, when you think about some of the other investments that have come from Global Sports Group and what CVC have done, how something like equestrian aligns with some of the more mainstream investments that they've made?
What's interesting for me is how it sounds like on paper, from what I've read, the Equine Network is a very vertically framed or set up business. And it's probably, if you're looking at its other investments, probably mirrored most likely by the Volleyball World operation, where they are running events, they are managing broadcasting and OTT offerings, and it's all kind of in the same ecosystem. Now, from what I've heard is that some people, it's not as beautifully vertically presented as it looks on paper, but that is sort of the thesis here, is that perhaps they, again, maximizing the value of each and every audience member that you are generating for that content. And it's a long established platform with a very wealthy and affluent audience base. Typically the equine audience is one that you want to be getting a piece of. I'm not sure how much that offsets with the Cowboy Channel's audience, but generally the equine world is a pretty expensive one to be invested into as a fan. So, but in short, it's that whole, it feels like from outside in, and I'm going to be talking to Mark Alera, who's the chair of the Global Sport Group, which is the sports dedicated arm of CVC, which is invested in F1 historically and exited from that successfully, and also all the other businesses that you mentioned previously. Is this vertical approach really what they were after? Were they looking for an organization where they can all own the whole fan experience, be able to drive monetization through e-commerce, through subscription sales, through live event sales? Is that the play here to get more value out of each and every fan? Because it feels like it is. And if it is, it's a really intriguing prospect to see what their investment and their experience, their mistakes and their successes, what that can lead them to do with something like this, which has way more touch points than a typical investment just in a sports property alone.
It'll be interesting, Nick, because our Sports Pro New York event does incorporate investment. It'll be, I think, last year we did investment in that as well as a new segment. I'm trying to remember, Nick, we've had our Sports Pro investment event. I'm trying to remember if we had an investment track last year or not.
I don't think we did. I think we had some content on it, but not dedicated focus. So we have more investor-related content than we've ever had at the US, the New York-based event. So definitely will be at the heart and soul of the conversation for sure.
Yeah, and especially at the time where the NBA and the NFL, I think, have changed some of their ownership rules about private equity and just sort of the general questions, whether or not, I'm even seeing it with the NIL in the college sports space, where are the opportunities for investors to make money out of sports? I think I've heard a lot of people say it's actually a terrible place to invest money. And if, it's nice if you just have money and you want to spend it because you like sports, but it's not necessarily the best place to go for things, but it is certainly something that's growing and is going to have an impact just simply based on sports needs more money, or maybe their businesses aren't structured as sustainably as they need to, and they're looking for investment or injection that it's not going anywhere, regardless of whether people think it's maybe for the best for the sport or not.
Well, the CVC approach has been interesting to investing into sports. If you look at each of the deals they've done, they all look quite a bit different. The La Liga deal has been built around, it's almost like a bit of an investment around a loan where they get guaranteed returns for media rights. And that investment was being taken and invested back into the clubs to drive infrastructure and investment into fan engagement and so forth. The Liga they built up a dedicated media business that they launched, and that's purely wrapped around those rights. And then Volleyball World's much more all-encompassing, where they created a whole new commercial entity, and they are backing that entire organization's growth, commercial growth, and events business. I am always a little bit nervous around just what investment's role is in sports and how it's going to actually help versus riding the coattails of sports in fan engagement. People will look to what has been paid out by the growth of clubs and leagues over the years because of the media right boom we saw 10, 15 years ago or so across the wider industries. It's leading to huge valuations even now in the US around the NBA and the NFL and alike. So it's easy to ride that wave and just buy at a right multiple and hope you're going to get more back in return. But what can that investment do to actually build a better sports property, build a better economic model, build a better fan experience? And so I'm intrigued to see this CVC or Global Sport Group approach, I'll say, to buy this organization that has more of a vertically aligned approach of connectivity with audiences. Because that, to me, makes loads more sense. If you can create a complete ecosystem and own that relationship and provide a value and do best in class across all of those aspects and do it well, then you've got something really exciting that completely scales the prospect of what your business can be versus just being a sports property, just delivering live events and monetizing through very traditional means. So I am intrigued to see where that goes. Global Sport Group is on a big raise, looking to raise billions to continue to invest into sports. No idea what that means, whether it's going to be on a team side or whether it's going to be in leagues or other entities. They have made some interesting roads. They've never really invested in someone at the top, like you see some of the other investment firms in. They just want a piece of that pie. And they typically take someone who's on the rise or a challenger business that they're looking to grow and scale to be the next F1. So I'm very intrigued to see what they can bring to the table and whether that vertically integrated approach really does pay off like they hope.
Well, that leads us nicely to talk about the last little story we want to talk about, which is the Kings League, which we've had on. We've had some of our events. It looks like they have now, just in their most recent funding round, have raised another $63 million, which brings them up to about a total of $160 million altogether across the multiple rounds that they've done. And this is aimed at a launch in the U.S. Those that don't know, a league pretty much, I guess the biggest name to attach to would be Gerard Piqué, famous Spanish football player, a long career at Barcelona. The idea is getting some retired superstars in with some media influencers to kind of drive similar stuff that we've seen. It's not exactly like Jake Paul and Logan Paul are doing, but there's similar sorts of vibes in terms of how they're trying to structure it. I guess, Nick, the question is, speaking of investment, they've just raised another $63 million. Are you concerned about it? Or is it a positive? Where are your takes when something like this starts getting money from so many investors on the outside?
Yeah, normally it's just celebrated, right? Oh, more money's coming in. That means it's successful. And I just get a bit nervous when I see this stuff, and I've just published something on LinkedIn about this just because I felt inclined to. I haven't felt the urge to write stuff lately, but I felt this one. I was like, this is just one of those signs that whenever I see a company who's on the rise and their business has been what I define as the poster child of disruption in this new era of sports and sports media, I just get nervous when the price tag and the number that success looks like goes up and up and up before they've got anywhere near to that. And raising 160 million for me is a huge amount. What does success look like? What do the investors need to see for this to be determined as a successful investment? Are we talking $1 billion valuation? Are we talking 2? Are we talking 3 or 4? At some stage, they want a massive return. And continuing to raise money out, I'm sure, though the revenues aren't close to the number they've raised so far, I get very nervous about what success could look like, because it means that ultimately, worst case scenario is they launch, they keep getting all this investment and it flops, or it just doesn't hit the lofty expectations. And then it gets moved on to another investor for peanuts on peanuts, and everyone might be left wanting. So, and I've seen this example in lots of tech-based companies in sports where they get loads of investment, raise, And they now need to be $1 billion business to be dubbed as successful. When I'm like, that was still providing huge services to the industry. It was getting loads of great clients. The revenues were high. If they just didn't have this number hanging over their heads, they could have continued to grow sustainably and establish themselves as one of the most exciting leagues in the industry. And so they are doing that right now. But I just get nervous when that price tag and that number keeps going up and up and up. So if they can keep going with it, all the better. And I would finally say that the vertical thing I mentioned before around private equity and its impact there, that is kind of Kings League's approach, right? They are managing and owning the entire relationship. So maybe that is where the opportunity is, and that's what they've got worked out. But to keep scaling when they're getting media rights deals, I can't imagine they've got huge checks behind them. It's going to be on sponsorship deals alone where they're going to drive that revenue and live ticket sales. Is that enough to be a multi-billion-dollar business in this day and age? I'm not sure.
Well, the other challenge as well is this league is built on the personalities of it. And I think the one thing we do know is when you introduce money, as you say, expectations change. And all of a sudden, are you as authentic as you were? Are all of a sudden the branded content, does it come across as gimmicky or salesy? Does it maintain? I think you even talked about its novelty. I think we've seen sometimes too much sports is actually problematic. And if all of a sudden there's investors, there's going to be expectations. You have a certain amount of matches, but if you have too many matches, does it lose its novelty? Does something like the Sidemen charity football match work because it's only once a year? There's those other sides of the issues as well, where the product inevitably will have to change to match with the investment that's come in. And does that actually create a bigger problem than anything else?
Look, I think the localized approach has a lot of legs, particularly from the event experience perspective. It's just turning that into anything more than just the live events ROI that you're talking about. I'm not sure how they continue to scale what they're building and keep that novelty value there to keep making the product exciting. Now, you keep bringing in new players and maybe that does some of it. But with these new initiatives that do get initial engagement, it's always the challenge of keeping it exciting from year on year or event to event for fans to come back to. And even if they've had a great time, if it's just the same sort of experience year on year, it is difficult to keep that audience engaged. And how many years of repeating the same model can they achieve to keep driving this into a multi-billion-dollar business, which it seems like their targets are? So, yeah, I just know. I know it's going to be tricky, but they've got heavy backing. They're going for the US, the most lucrative media market. If they achieve some of those milestones that they would be looking to achieve, i.e., audience growth, getting a media rights deal in place or two for some of the major networks, then the game does change. The game does change massively, and that number that I'm talking about is going to be straightforward. But there's no sports other than like the IPL that I can look at that has proven that you can build a $1 billion sport or sports property in this day and age. So I will reserve judgment until I see a bit more, but I feel their journey is going to be difficult.
I agree. Well, Nick, it was a pleasure as always. And thank you once again, everybody, for tuning in, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Thanks, everyone.